Frank Sinatra suspected that Marilyn Monroe was murdered. Why? In this video we explore the mysteries surrounding Marilyn Monroe's death, uncover the truth about that August night in 1962. Was it a tragic accident or something darker? And what role did Frank Sinatra play in this puzzle? Back in the 1950s and 60s, Marilyn Monroe and Frank Sinatra were the biggest Hollywood stars. Their names were everywhere. They had countless fans worldwide, and their fame remains legendary even after all these years. Did you know that these two actually dated? The nature of their bond is still a bit mysterious. Was it a close friendship or something more? The whole deal between Sinatra and Monroe was pretty darn complicated, but what's evident is that Sinatra and Monroe shared strong feelings, and even after all this time, Frank never got over Marilyn Monroe's sudden death. You know what's interesting? People have all sorts of ideas about their relationship. Some think they were just pals, while others, like Charles Cassillo, swear they were in some kind of open relationship. He wrote this book. Like many men, Frank Sinatra fell under her spell. He treated her like he had never treated any other woman. Sinatra considered marrying Monroe to save her from herself, but his lawyer shut that idea down because she was a bit unpredictable, you know. No one will mess with her if she is Mrs. Frank Sinatra, a friend said. No one would dare. He felt that if she were his wife, everyone else would back off, give her some space, and allow her to get herself together. But then you've got Sinatra's buddy and ex-road manager, Tony Opodisano, chiming in with a completely different story. According to him, they were just pals, plain and simple, although they weren't lovers. Monroe did share all her deepest secrets to old Blue Eyes. She opened up about her scandalous secrets, like her affairs with John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert. When those oh-so-famous affairs suddenly came to an end, Marilyn spilled everything to Frank. She was puzzled why they ghosted her completely after she stopped having sex with them. He had a special place in Frank Sinatra's heart for Marilyn, and he believed she was a fragile girl who'd been exploited by a lot of people. That's part of the reason why he said, even though as pretty as she was, as attracted as I was to her, I just couldn't bring myself to go there physically. That's something she even tried to pursue with him, but he said, I just couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to do that. I didn't want to be another older guy who appeared to take advantage of her and then leave her flat. I couldn't bring myself to do that. He cared about her too much, and again his protective nature kept him from doing that. Following Monroe's death in 1962, many conspiracy theories emerged about the nature of her death. Was it an overdose or something more sinister? Frank Sinatra held a different view, doubting the accidental overdose theory. Frank believed she was murdered. A week before she passed away, Monroe hung out at the fancy Carnival Lodge near the beautiful Lake Tahoe, and guess what? Frank was actually in charge of that place back then. What most people didn't know was that she was there to have some private moments with her ex-husband, Joe DiMaggio, who was also around. She even had a plan to announce that they were back together, through a press release she was going to issue a week later. The media was in the dark about the big reveal. They thought she was going to spill the beans about her flings with JFK and RFK, but Marilyn would never have shared those details because she still had feelings for John. Frank believed if the press conference hadn't been announced, she would have lived a lot longer. He even had tried to push her to give life another shot, but she said, "Why bother? I won't be around for much longer." And she was right. The actress passed away on August 4th, 1962, at the age of 36. She was found naked on her bed, face down, clutching a telephone in one hand. The room was scattered with empty pill bottles that were meant to treat her depression. The Los Angeles police stated that Monroe's death was caused by a self-administered overdose of sedative drugs, but even decades later the details around her passing continued to spark questions. Monroe's life before she passed was quite a roller coaster. She battled substance abuse, and her mental health was on a downward spiral. From the release of The Misfits, she hadn't finished any more movies and spent the entire year grappling with health problems. A couple of days after she died, Sinatra's lawyer, Mickey Rudin, who by the way also worked with Monroe, gave him the bad news. There was this rumour going around that mob boss Sam Giancana's crew might have been involved somehow, and get this, some of those guys even went as far as saying they were connected to her passing. Frank received info from a bunch of people close to Monroe, all saying the same thing. Based on what he heard, Monroe's death involved a Nembutal suppository, and either Robert Kennedy or the Mafia might have been connected. Because Monroe wasn't just a Hollywood starlet, she was the mob's darling. The glitz and glamour of the golden age of Hollywood intertwined with the gritty underworld of organised crime. Her rise to fame wasn't a solo act. It involved some shadowy characters behind the scenes. The mob saw her star potential and couldn't resist getting involved in her life. From rumoured affairs to alleged manipulations, Monroe's story gets even juicier when you factor in the mob's influence. But wait, it's not all sinister. Monroe's interactions with the mob weren't just about shady dealings. There were complex relationships, whispers of behind-the-scenes power plays, and even protection from some very influential figures. If you know what I mean, it's like a Hollywood mystery thriller that plays out in real life. Remember the Godfather actor Gianni Russo? You might recall him as the mobster Carlo Rizzi from the Godfather movies. He also had a wild belief that RFK was involved in Marilyn's death. In his book, Russo shared a bunch of untold details about Marilyn's sudden death. Russo said he had an on-and-off thing with Monroe, starting when he was 16 and she was 23. He even had a picture of them together at the Calnevar Lodge before her tragic end. He claims the guy behind the camera was none other than the Chicago crime boss, Sam Giancana. He speculated that Giancana and the mob had targeted Monroe in an attempt to reach the president. According to a report by the Daily Mail, their plan was to catch Monroe in a compromising situation with JFK and Robert on tape, and believe it or not, they intended to use that tape to blackmail the president into invading Cuba and returning the island's casinos to the mob. Unbelievable, right? But things took a turn when the president didn't show up at the resort, so they had to switch up their plan a bit. According to Russo, Monroe got wind of it and actually threatened to tell the truth to the media about the mob's scheme. When RFK got wind of Monroe's plan, he plotted to have her bumped off to shut down her agenda. It's said that the Kennedys were in a frenzy that Marilyn Monroe could expose their polished image during that press conference. And you know how those high and mighty guys don't like their master plans unravelling, especially at the hands of a woman, right? Could they have pulled some strings in this whole drama? Russo was absolutely convinced that it had to be Bobby who was behind Marilyn's death. He thought the mob wouldn't have done it because they actually liked her. They knew she had that whole party reputation going on. According to him, all they would have needed to do was give her a few pills and a couple of strong drinks, and she would have slept with about anyone. According to Russo's book, there was this guy known as the Doctor. He was a hitman with a legit MD degree and did hits for the mob. He injected air into a vein near Monroe's pubic region, which caused an embolism that eventually took her life, but to the coroner it seemed like a regular drug overdose. And hey, just a quick thing. If you're feeling a bit curious, test your knowledge with our free Golden Age quiz. Click the link in the description to discover if you're a true aficionado or not. I'd appreciate it. But don't go anywhere yet. We're about to share some interesting contradictions we spotted at the scene of her death. These still make us wonder if the official story adds up. Was Marilyn Monroe's death truly an overdose, or was there more going on? We might not ever uncover the full truth, but it's a thought that's definitely worth pondering. On that unfortunate night, Marilyn Monroe made a call to a guy named Peter Lawford, a British actor and the spouse of JFK's sister, Pat. Her voice was slurred and a bit shaky, and she concluded the conversation with a rather ominous request for Peter to say goodbye to Pat on her behalf. After that she told Lawford that he should also say goodbye to the President, and not to forget about himself, because, in her words, he was a nice guy. Sadly, a few hours later, Monroe was found dead in her Los Angeles mansion. Eunice Murray, who was Marilyn's housekeeper, noticed a light on in her bedroom at around 3:30 a.m. She felt the need to call Monroe's psychologist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, and her personal physician, Dr. Hyman Engelberg. Around 3:40 a.m., Greenson was the first to arrive and found Monroe's lifeless body. Engelberg joined a few minutes later and confirmed her death. The coroner's report mentioned that she passed away from an overdose of barbiturates. They thought it might have been an accident, but they also looked into the possibility of self-harm. But the official story misses some big red flags that might scream foul play. Get this, some of the top dogs who were around at the time actually changed their tune later, casting shadows of doubt on their initial reports. They were kind of pressured into going along with a potential cover-up. A couple of these folks even hinted that she might have been silenced to protect the likes of President Kennedy and his brother Robert. Back in the day, pretty much everyone either had the inside scoop on the president's thing with Marilyn, or at least had their suspicions. Turns out Monroe and the president were in on an overnight stay at Bing Crosby's swanky Palm Springs pad on that very same night, and it's a done deal that they had crossed paths on a few other occasions before that too. It's pretty obvious that Marilyn was deep in a more than just friendly thing with Robert Kennedy for a good while, so there's a chance he was going the extra mile to steal Marilyn's focus away from a complicated relationship with the president. And you won't believe this, are you ready? Sinatra wasn't allowed at Monroe's funeral. Monroe's love life was like a roller coaster, especially with DiMaggio. Even after their split, his affection never wavered, not even in death. He kept his promise by sending roses to her resting place every single week, a pledge he held from a request she once made. The New York Times shared that when DiMaggio found out about Monroe's thing with Sinatra, he was shattered. They used to be thick as thieves, so when Monroe's final act came and the day of her goodbye dawned, DiMaggio took matters into his own hands. He made sure Sinatra wasn't on the guest list, keeping him from bidding farewell to the woman they both held dear. Isn't that weird? Now let's delve into the official version. Monroe was struggling with heavy depression and immense stress leading up to her death. They say she believed her life was spiralling out of control, so she took her own life. But was that the real story? Sure thing, Monroe was certainly dealing with depression, but was that the reason enough for her to decide to end her life? It's a question that people have been debating for more than 50 years, and it's unlikely we'll ever find an answer. What's clear is that she had a tough time juggling the demands of stardom. To manage the stress, she turned to a mix of psychiatric drugs to find some balance and peace, as she once put it, somewhat level-headed and pacified. Before her passing, she got the boot, due to always being late on the set of her latest 20th Century Fox film. On top of that, she had quite a lineup of ex-lovers and husbands to deal with, big names like baseball maverick Joe DiMaggio and playwright Arthur Miller. Over 50 years later, the truth remains a mystery. Conspiracy theories have circulated endlessly. One thing he's certain of, though, is that Sinatra carried the weight of her passing till the end. Monroe was one of Frank's closest friends and allies. When his Rat Pack buddies, Sammy Davis Jr. and Dean Martin, gathered at Frank's Palm Springs place, they'd often chat about her into the early hours. Those stories and late-night chats stayed private for a long time. I hope you appreciate that I uncovered the personal side of the music icon Frank Sinatra and how he felt about Monroe. It's a privilege that I shared with you the man that only a few had the opportunity to know. I truly believe he wished that someday we would spread the stories he wanted the world to hear. Do you ever wonder if the Kennedys might have had a hand in Monroe's demise? Like some secret plan to keep her from revealing their dealings with her to the media? Or could it be the mob's fingerprints all over, silencing her to keep their gambling game strong? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm dying to know your take on this story. And remember that even legends like Frank Sinatra were tangled in enigmatic stories. I hold countless more secrets waiting for you, ready to unveil more mysteries. Your chance is right now in the next video. Why was Frank Sinatra tracked by the FBI throughout his life? Keep exploring.